Yom HaShishi Echulu HaShamayim V'Yoretz V'Chol Tzom.
Breakneck Through the Bible, presented by Torch Dallas. Your host, Rabbi Bentzi Epstein.
Welcome everybody back to Breakneck Through the Bible. Starting the Torah, chapter 1, verse 1. Tom, would you like to read?
I would, Rabbi, but I have a question first.
Yes.
I think it's odd that we're beginning with verse 1, chapter 1, but in the Chumash it's page 2. One would think you'd start on page 1.
So it's very interesting. You will always find the Talmud as well, but it starts on page 2. It doesn't start on page 1.
Why is that?
And the reason it starts on page 2 is because when you finish it, you shouldn't say you finished it. You never did page 1. So it reminds you to go back and start again.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so you never... And the same thing is with the Torah, every time you study it, there's always more you can glean. And as you grow and as you pick up the information, as you read through the Torah, when you start again, when you finish it, you could start again because you're in a whole different place than you were originally. And so now you kind of have to relearn it at that level.
So that makes total sense, especially in a book format that has pages that are numbered. Does that concept hold true on the Torah scrolls? Is there anything that brings that concept that you were saying to the scrolls itself, or is that only true in the book format?
That's a good question. Let me think about that for a moment. It's interesting, and just on this point, I don't know if we mentioned it before or not, but the paragraph and verse numbers is actually not part of the Jewish Bible. That was just created by the monks in probably roughly 1,000 years ago or so, and they used that just as a referencing. Because in the Jewish Torah, look in the Torah, there are no punctuations for ends of sentences. There's only paragraph breaks.
And there's no pages.
And there's no pages, right? And so we use chapter and verse really just as a way of, just so we're on the same page. But really, we're just paragraph numbers, right? We're just paragraphs of what we're going ahead and of... paragraph, just another paragraph. And actually where the verses begin and end is also part of the oral law. And so you won't find a dot, like a period in the Torah scroll.
Or commas.
Or commas, no dots and no commas. Part of the oral law, there are commas and there are periods. And that's why some people say, Rabbi, I just want to read the Bible, but I don't want the oral law. I laugh. I say, you won't even know how to read the Bible. Because not only that, there's no vowels in the Bible. So how do you know how to even read it? So if you just want to read the Bible, go ahead. Good luck, friend. Adios. Have a great day. You don't even know how to read it.
I know in the past you've told a story about not being able to understand the Bible relative to punctuation. You're talking about, I think, milk and meat and
cooking a kid in its mother's milk, or is it its mother's milk or mother's fat? Because fat and milk are the same letters. So if there's no vowels on it, so it's the word chalav is milk and chelev is fat. So it says, the verse actually says you can't lo sevashel gidi b'chalev imo. You can't cook a kid in its mother's milk. It could just as easily be read as lo sevashel gidi. You cannot cook a kid bechelev imo, in the fat of its mother.
Well, and that would eliminate fried food. So I'm thankful that.
Yeah, I'd much rather give up the chicken and the milk, the meat and the milk, rather than the.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, those onion rings are really, chicken fried steak.
There we go.
Okay, go ahead, take it away.
In the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty, with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God said that the light was good, and God separated between the light and the darkness. God called the light day, and to the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning one day.
Okay, so that's the first day of the Torah, and really there's so much that just has to be addressed here. Why did God create the Torah? Right? What's the purpose of the Torah? As we spoke about last week, right? It's to teach us, right? To teach us how to live our lives, right? Morals and ethics. And that's what the Torah, and the Torah is really a book of morals and ethics. So the question is that, and how does it convey these laws, right? Is really through mitzvot, right? Through the commandments, and there are 613 commandments in the Torah. Well, we recognize that the commandments really only start really in the middle of Exodus. Exodus chapter 12 is really where they start. There are only 3 commandments in the book of Genesis, and those 3 commandments are repeated elsewhere in the Torah. So the question is, why does God even start off with the book of Genesis if it's here to teach me morals and ethics? So then it should go ahead and it should be morals and ethics. Start the mitzvah. Why is it giving me God created the world? Why is that important for me to know? And so there are 2 reasons given. Number 1 is that God establishes the fact that he created the world. Why is that important? Well, we're living in his world. We're living in his world. We have to follow his rules. It's like the person who goes on a basketball court and wants to make up his own rules. Great, find your own basketball court, get your own ball and go play. Nobody's stopping you. You don't like God's rules? Good, get off his earth and go play it yourself. And don't think about going in outer space, because he created that too. So it's God's world, and so we live by his rules.
So just a quick question. Often we as Jews reference God as who took us out of Egypt. Why wouldn't it be God who created light and day?
Very good. Or created the heavens and the earth. Not only that, they really asked the question when it comes to the 10 Commandments. Right? I'm Hashem, God who took you out from the land of Egypt. Why does God use who took you out from Egypt? It's much bigger miracle to create the world. That should be I'm Hashem, God who created the world. And over there, God uses that because God is saying, you do not have to take my word that I created the world. You personally experienced the exodus from Egypt. And since you personally went and came out of Egypt and saw it, so you know that. You don't have to take anybody's word for it. So God would rather have something that we actually experienced firsthand. That's why he says, right, I'm the God who took you out from Egypt, not the God who created the world. But he created the world to teach me this lesson. As well, all the stories that we learn in Genesis, each of these stories are here to teach us lessons. I actually had a funny story this past week. I was traveling. Actually was in Atlanta for a conference. And we got to the airport, and it was Hertz Rent-A-Car. Shout out to Hertz. They were very kind. And we pulled into the airport, and I had taken even a few of the other rabbis a ride back to the airport. So there's 4 of us piling out of this, what I would call, small car.
How many rabbis can you fit in a Hertz car kind of thing?
And they had somebody there who said, hey, there's a train back, but if you want, I'll drive you back to the terminal. So we said, well, that's so kind of you. Thank you so much. We'll take you up on the offer. So we all 4 pile into a Chevy Tahoe. And we get in the Chevy Tahoe and we start driving to the airport. And the guy says, I got a question. He said, what we do in Atlanta? I said, well, we've been at a conference. He says, oh man, I got a question for you, which was really great. And I said, what's your question? He said, well, people talk about sin, but everyone sins. So you do this, you do that. Like nobody can tell anybody they're doing something wrong because they're doing things wrong. So I said, first of all, I said, according to Judaism, the Talmud says the only one who can judge is God, because only God judges, because only God knows what a person was given with, all the circumstances of how they were raised, yada yada yada. There's so many things that go into it, and so therefore what's expected. I said that's clear. Ein dan el yechidi. The only one who can judge is God. No, that's not a question. I said, but don't think for a second that all sins are the same. He says, what do you mean? Where in the Bible does he give a list of the things? I said, well, Sodom and Gomorrah got overturned. God did not do that to many other places. The Tower of Babel, I said, God didn't destroy the world, just scattered us. The flood, he did kill us. Cain and Abel, he exiled him. Adam and Eve, he exiled him. Right? So you see that there are different levels of sin, and depending on the level of sin is depending on what the punishment is. And God takes certain sins much more seriously than other sins. He says, wow, that's so cool. He says, where can I see a list of this ranking? So I said, well, he says, we're in the Bible. He says, I read my Bible, but where should I look for it? I said, well, you actually won't find it written out in the Bible. I said, but if you take a look at Maimonides, the laws of repentance, he will have a list there of the different severities of the laws. I said, but you might want to check there.
So Rabbi, is it even physically possible throughout history to actually live a life without sin?
So it's very, very interesting. God, there were 4 people in the world that died without sin. 4.
Were they babies that died at birth?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. Actually, you bring that up, right? Babies that die at birth obviously don't sin. Right? Any person who dies before a 12 for a girl or 13 for a boy have not sinned, right? So or we aren't responsible for it, right? But there are 4 people that lived their lives and really only died, as we said. Right, the Talmud uses the expression from the poison of the snake, from the sin that Adam and woman did in the garden. Really, from that sin, sort of they died as because of that. And that was Benjamin, Jacob's son, Amram, who was Moses' father, Yishai, who was King David's father, and Kalev. Not the Kalev in the Bible or in the 5 books, but it's Kalev, the son of David. Right. So those are the 4 people. Those are the 4 people that died without sin. But everyone else sins. The problem isn't sinning. The problem is after we sin, what do we do? Right. And we get the story of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve don't get kicked out of the garden because they sinned. Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden because they didn't repent, right? They didn't return to God. So sinning by Jews is okay. It's. I mean, I don't want to say it's all right, but it's okay. Like, get over it and move on. Correct yourself. Actually, it's quite interesting. If you think of the Hebrew words for sin, it's very, very fascinating, right? What's the Hebrew word for sin? So there's a few different words, right? So one word is chet. You know what the word chet means?
To sin.
So the word chet really means to miss the mark. What happens when you shoot at a target and you miss? You shoot again. So at that point in time, when you do something wrong, try again. Another word for sin is avera, which means to cross over. What happens when you're driving and you cross over the yellow line or you cross over the white line? You steer back and get back on the road. Just took a few road trips, right, during the summer, and when I'm driving and I cross over, right, we cross back, right? So sin is really something that God has perfection in angels. God doesn't need perfection. Man could be greater than angels or lower than animals, because animals and angels both are robots. Angels are spiritual robots. Animals are physical robots. Man has free will. And our job is to use our free will, to use it as a vehicle to come closer to God. And so what happens is we go ahead and we use our free will to come closer to God. That's really what it's all about.
I'm sure throughout this podcast series, we'll be talking more and more about free will.
Free will is what it's all about, my friends, because that's what makes us unique, different than animals, right? And that makes us, king of the world, free will. And it's the use of that free will and how to use it properly, which is really what life's all about. But yes, we will get deep into free will territory. So what happens is we have free will. So we use our free will to go ahead and to make choices. And when we make poor choices, fix them. You make wrong choices, fix them. Get to a place of fixing your choices. Make good choices. Right? So that's really where sin comes in. Right? Sin is you made a mistake. Okay, fix it.
So is there a concept, Rabbi, of making a good choice, but maybe you could have made a better choice?
Yes.
Can you explain that? I mean, it's easy for me and perhaps the listening audience to understand a bad choice and fixing it for a good choice, and that's almost black and white or 1 and 2. But when you're making a good choice versus a better choice, would you call that a sin?
So the answer is whatever you do, then just do better. You make an investment. So a great choice is you 10x your investment, right? You invest $1,000, you get $10,000 back. Good choice, you invest $1,000, you get back $1,200. Or maybe good choice is you don't lose money, right? But okay, so you make $1,100, you make $1,200. It's a good choice. So what do? Invest again, right? Keep on. It's striving. It's what we call that growth in Judaism. That's really what Judaism is really about. Is about growth. It's about us really becoming better people, becoming greater people, right? That's really what it boils down to, and really how we need to really strive for to get to.
So in your life, have you had an experience where you've made a good choice, but in hindsight you look at it and say, well, I could have made a better choice?
Yes, sure.
Any example come to mind?
Yeah. I had a choice of 2 people to study with. And I thought that person A, I would be more helpful to person A. But so we studied. It was okay. Wasn't great. It was fine. And then it turns out that person B was really smoking. He really was on fire. And it would have been my investment in person B would have been greater. Right? So you make a choice. And that's okay. Because you do what's best of what's in front of you. It's actually fascinating. Judaism, don't worry about the results because we don't control results. God controls results. The only thing we control is effort. So did you make the best choice at that moment? And if you didn't, so correct it next time.
It reminds me in business, in the sales area, you really can't control making or closing sales. You do the right activities to result in the sale, but you can't actually do the sale. And that seems to be a similar
thing. It's very true. We have to understand we cannot control people. We can only control ourselves and what we do, and us making the right choices. And so that's really what it is. So again, we start off the question, so why is God talking about Genesis? And the answer is 2 reasons. Number 1 is that it's his world, and he wants to make it clear that it's his world, and therefore he makes the rules, and if we don't like it, leave his world. And outer space is still his world, so you can't even go there. So good luck. I'm not sure where you can go. Maybe go down to the Titanic. That's still his world. Okay? And then you can't go up, go down. And number 2 is to teach us morals and ethics, right? And the stories that we go through Genesis, each story will have a lesson, right, or multiple lessons of morals and ethics, and the nuances of the story will teach us morals and ethics, and we have to sort of tease those out and learn those things. So the Torah starts off with a Beis, the letter Beis, the Hebrew letter Beis is how the Torah starts off. Why does the Torah start with the letter Beis, which is 2?
Opposed to Aleph, which would be
the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And not only that, an Aleph would make sense because the Hebrew letter Aleph also stands for God. That's actually why the Hebrew letter Aleph, it's spelled Aleph Lamed Pei, which is Aleph, but it really also can be read as Aluf, a general. And it's 1, right? The Hebrew letter numerical value of Aleph is 1, which is God. And actually the 10 Commandments starts off with an Aleph. But the Torah starts off with a Beis, right? And the reason for that is, again, same thing as you asked before, right? That's why we start off the Talmud with page 2, right? Is that you never finish it. But it's also that 2 is that before there was a world, before there was a universe, what existed?
Just God.
Just God. So now if he wants to create a world, what does God do to create a world? He's everywhere.
He's got to pull back and create space.
That's very good. So he creates space, and then he creates a world. So for the first time, it's just not God. There's now 2.
And let me just say, Rabbi, that really comes from years and years of learning with you, because I think our general audience might have said, well, there's nothing.
Right. But it's not even nothing, because there's no world, there's no space, right? There's only God, and that's an important concept too to wrap your mind about, because you go ahead and you have God, there's no space, there's no world, there's no time. Right? Time itself is a creation, right? And scientists have proven that time started a few nanoseconds after the Big Bang. So what happens is, so time only starts after God. So people say, well, what existed before God? The answer is that's a silly question. There was no before, because there's no such thing as time. You either existed or didn't. God existed, nothing else did. So therefore you can't ask who created God, because who created God means that there was something before God. But you only have that question when you have time. When there's no time, there's nothing as before.
Very interesting.
And so therefore it's God. All God. And what the irony of is that even in this world, there's a great line we always like to say, it's all God, all the time. And in reality, that's what it is. And this world is just a smoke screen to sort of to hide God, so then we can make free will decisions. Because if we had the clarity of God, there's no way we would ever not listen to him. So the world has a smoke screen that goes ahead and is actually screening God, and our job is to poke through and say, I see God, see God, see God, see God here, see God there, see everywhere to see God. That's actually what's the Hebrew name for the word God? The Hebrew name, not for the word God. The Hebrew name for the world.
Olam.
Olam. It's called Olam Hazeh, this world. But you know that the root of the word Olam, O-L-A-M, right, in English, right, the root of that word is He'elam, which is hidden. And it's Olam Hazeh. It's like hidden here. Who's hidden? God. What's our job? Find God. Right? And that's the whole world. Right? The whole world is put into a place that it's a mask. And our job is to peek through the mask and to find God. And don't be fooled by the mask, because that's when you get in trouble.
Great.
Okay, so Beis, so it starts with 2, because the world, once there was something, quote unquote, outside of God, right? Or God created space, and now there's a world, and now we operate in this world, right? So there's 2, and our job is to take the 2 and to bring it back to 1. Right, to take the 2 and to bring it back to godliness. Right, that's our job. So that's why the Torah begins with the Beis. Now, how long did God create the world for?
Well, we know as we study further for 6,000 years.
Okay, so if it's actually interesting, the first word tells us how long the world is created for. The first word is Bereshis, but it's also, if you split that word in half, is bara, created, shis, which is 6. Right? The world was created for 6,000 years. And now it's very, and as well, if you take a look, there are 6 alephs in the first word. Right? And aleph not only is 1, but aleph is the word elef, 1,000 is the same letters as aleph. So there are 6 alephs, which is 6,000 years. Now, what's very important to note is that the world could be billions and billions of years old. According to Judaism, right, the Zohar says the world is 14 billion years old. Okay, yet we say when you're 5783, 5,783, right? So why is the world 5,783 years old? The answer is because we count from the creation of man, right? The whole world, right, could have been created. It could have taken God a second to create it, or not even a second. There wasn't even time, right? Or it could have taken 14 billion years. Or God created a world that looks like 14 billion years old. You know, the famous story I like to use is if Adam would have chopped down the cherry tree. America took that. George Washington chopped down the cherry tree. Well, if Adam would have chopped down the cherry tree in the day 1 in the Garden of Eden, how many rings would there have been in the tree? When Adam went walking in the forest, was there not any trees that were decaying in the earth and mulching? God created an old world. So God could have created a world that was 14 billion years old. Could have created a world that in 14 billion years. God could have created it in a second, made it look 14 billion years old. God could have taken 6 days and made a world look like 14 billion years old. So all those are options that are great.
You know, that's so interesting, because I had the on occasion recently to visit in Washington, D.C., the Natural History Museum. And I'm looking at all of these things and all of this science that is dating everything 14 billion years. And so you've really clarified that it's not from the creation of man, but it's from God creating the world, and he could have made it look that old. Right?
Yeah, very, very much so, right? That the world... So we Jews have no problem with the world being 14 billion years old, 6 days old, and even 6 days, it's problematic, right? You just read, right, that God created, what did God create on day 1?
Light and dark.
Light and dark. And that's not even true, because we know there's water, because in verse 2 it says, right, the Spirit of God was hovering over the depths of the water. But it doesn't even tell us when water was created, because the Torah is not telling me the order of how things were created. It's not important to us. Right? What's important is there's a reason what was on day 1 and day 2 and day 3. Right? There were lessons that have to be learned. So there was, and what did he call that light? Day. And the darkness he called?
Night.
Right? So where does that light come from? Right? Daylight. Where does daylight come from? It comes from the sun. Right?
But the sun wasn't created yet.
Aha! How do we know the sun wasn't created yet?
Because later we'll read when
on
the
day
sun was
4
created.
that the sun is created on day 4, and I think that's a chapter. It's chapter 1, and it's verse. Just get it here. I think it's verse 14. Hang on a second.
Yeah, it is 14.
Yeah, God said, "Let there be luminaries in the firmament of the heavens to separate between the day and the night, and they shall serve as signs and for festivals and for days and years," right? And they shall serve as luminaries in the firmament of the heavens to shine upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the 2 great luminaries, the greater luminary to dominate the day, and the lesser luminary to dominate the night and the stars, right? And so God only creates the sun on day 4. So how do you have light on day 1 that we call daylight? So, and not only that, but gets even more problematic is, what's a sign if you washed up on a beach, on an island in the middle of the ocean without any watches? How would you count a day?
The setting and rising of the sun.
Right. And what is that? And really what that is, not just a setting rising, it's the revolution of the earth vis-a-vis the sun. When the part of the earth that you're on turns towards the sun, that's sun up. When it turns away, that's sun down. So how do you have a day when you don't have a sun? The sun doesn't show up till day 4. That, my friends, is a conversation stopper. It's actually funny. I'll tell you a great story. I was teaching at a law firm, this big law firm, downtown Dallas, and I came in once a week to give a Bible class. They were very kind to give me a space, and there was one lawyer there who was a bit, like snotty, and he walks in one day, and he goes, "Oh, you're the rabbi teaching the class." I said, "Yeah, I am." He says, "Oh, religion, like that's for stupid people." So I said to him, I said, it's fascinating. I said, because, you read the Bible. I'm sure you must have read it, right? There's one book in the world God has written. I'm sure you must have read the book, right? He goes, "Yeah." I said, "But you read it as a 2-year-old, I said, "You're a lawyer. You have to use it. You have to use your brains to read this." He says, "Well, what do you mean?" So I said, "Okay." So I asked him this question: what did God create on day 1? He said, "Light and dark." I said, "Great." I said, "And where did that light come from?" He goes, "Well, the sun." I said, "Yeah, but doesn't it say day 4 that God created the sun on day 4? So how do you have light on day 1? He says, "Well, Rabbi, that's a very good point." I said, "That's correct." I said, "But that's how you have to read the Bible. Now your job is to go back home and read the Bible like a lawyer." I said, "And then we can discuss any questions you have." Right? So it's very, very interesting, right? You have to read the Bible intelligently, right? And then when you and in Judaism, we love questions, because questions go ahead and they sharpen our brains and give us insights into things that we never even thought about. Right? So we need the Torah, right? The more questions we learn, the more insights we can gain. So Judaism is really built on questions. We love questions. In my house, when I ask a question at my Shabbat table and a kid gets it right, or an adult, I give them a candy. But when they ask me a good question, I give them 2 candies, because good questions are better than one smart answer. And that's you have to condition. You got to think, right? And the more you think, the more that will be, the more that you'll understand, the more that you'll grow, the more information, the broader your brains will become.
So this also addresses the question of learning the Bible, of learning the Torah at different stages in your life, and teaching it to a child versus a teenager versus an adult. To what you're saying is, as you go through it, with the different background, with the different skill level, you learn different things.
Absolutely. And as you pick up knowledge in the world, right? As you pick up knowledge in the world, you become smarter. So then you have to take that back and you have to relearn it. Somebody just pointed out to me, there was a great sage, probably lived, in the 11th, 12th century. And he goes ahead and he writes that even your knowledge of God, you have to keep on relearning it, because as you gain more knowledge and as you grow as a human being, at that point in time you become greater. At that point in time you go ahead, you become you now have new information, you now have new insights, and you have to revisit the questions that you knew, because now you're going to have additional insights and additional ways to understand it as you go through different life experiences. Recently I had some medical issues, and there's a blessing we say after we go out of the bathroom, thanking God for our bodies working. Till you have some serious issues, you really don't think twice about your body and how wonderful it works, and all the different things. And now, heck, there's nothing I don't appreciate about my body. right? And it's really learning those things and being appreciative and thankful to God, right? And now I feel bad because for the first 50 years of my life, I wasn't appreciative enough to God for it, right? But when you're about to lose it, right? It becomes, at that point in time, it becomes something that God, okay, let's thank you, God, right, for making it work, right? And right, just really something that we got to kind of just keep front and center, right? That our relationship with God is fluid in that way, that it continuously grows and expands and becomes greater, and our job is to expand our minds and to become greater and more godly people. That's as we're able to do that, it becomes an amazing thing.
Do you want to go on to the second day?
No, because we're not finished with the first day yet.
Okay.
So it's interesting. It says in the beginning of God's creating. So the Hebrew word that he used for creating is bara. Okay, the word bara is to create. But create in the Hebrew language is different than anywhere else. It means when I say I created this, right? Tom, you work in computers, right? So you create a computer. You take the pieces, you put it together, you created a computer. Yeah, that works.
Sure.
But you didn't create a computer, because those pieces, you just took pieces and put it together. You assembled a computer. You didn't create a computer. Creation means creating something from nothing. So when you read the first verse, in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, what that means is that there was nothing there, and then God went ahead and created the world. In fact, it's kind of pretty cool, right? How does the Torah actually tells us how God created the world?
How did he do that?
So let's look at verse 2 for a second, right? Let's reread verse number 2. Tommy, we want to read it again?
Surely. When the earth was astonishingly empty, with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Okay, so it's interesting. So the way the Hebrew of the verse, right, starts off with the haaretz and the earth. Hayasa was tohu vavohu. Tohu vavohu is very two interesting Hebrew words. If you look in English translations, every translation of it is different. Void and desolate. People use all sorts of different words, and when that happens, it's because people really don't know what the translation is. And by the way, just on that note, translations in general are interpretations. That's why if you really want to know what the Bible really means, what the Torah really is teaching us, you have to go ahead and you have to read it in the original, in Hebrew. And you have to learn Hebrew and learn how to read it in the Hebrew. Because otherwise you're going to lose a lot of the nuances. And then not only that, but then you also need the oral law. And so if you learn the oral law, then you could kind of package it into you see how it comes back into the written law.
So you really need to study the Torah with a rabbi. Otherwise, you're highly probable that you'll be lost.
Correct. Well, not lost. Lost is not the problem. The problem is you're going to learn the wrong things. But you have to study with a rabbi who knows the oral law, right? So you need a teacher who is educated, right, in the Talmud, in the oral law. And that way then they could go ahead and they could teach you what's really being taught.
And the benefit of this podcast is you have one of the best rabbis leading our way.
Thank you, Tom. Who's that?
Bentzi Epstein.
Okay. Thank you for the shout out. But the Talmud says that I learned much from my rabbis. I learned even more from my study partners. but from my students, I learned the most.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. Why? Because the student makes you think, right? They ask you questions that you never thought about, or looking at it from a totally different angle. So throughout a year's time, you've been a very good teacher. Thank you. So the words tohu vavohu. There was a great sage named Nachmanides who lived in the 1100s, a little bit after Rashi. And he says the words tohu vavohu, he said, God created a mustard-size seed of matter, vavohu, in it was everything. Okay, a mustard-sized seed of matter or energy that had the entire world in it. Now, let's just give a little context. Scientists in the 11th and 1100s said the world never was created. Right? It was always existed. It was flat. And here the rabbi says that the Torah is teaching us that the world was a mustard-sized seed of matter or energy, that the entire word vavohu, well, he said the word vavohu is a compound word, vavo, in it, who was everything. Which is fascinating, because if you take a look, right, and scientists say the Big Bang, what was the Big Bang? Is this black hole, right, that the entire universe was compressed into it, and that exploded and created the universe. Now, that's sounding awfully familiar, like Nachmanides. So it's good. So scientists figured this out, I think in the 1950s, it was when they came out with the Big Bang. What's really great about it is they would have asked the rabbis, they would have learned about it 850 years beforehand. But they probably didn't study with a rabbi. That was their problem. Right? But that's what Nachmanides says. Right? It's great. It's fantastic. Right?
And it's also consistent when you hear that. It's consistent with the different concepts or definitions of the beginning of the world.
Correct.
So Judaism is not at opposition to some of the prevailing
science.
Yeah.
Right. And that's in general, it's never a problem, because really Judaism should be aligned with science, because Judaism is God telling us how He created the world, and science is really us trying to figure out how the world was created. So true science should be the truth, which that would be Judaism then. And it's actually interesting. One of the greatest spiritual moments of my life, I still remember it till today. There used to be a magazine called U.S. News and World Report. I don't believe they are now defunct. And what happened was they had like a page like on science discoveries, and I think it was right after the Hubble Space Telescope started sending back pictures, and the article was written. It was a one-page article about pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope. And in the middle of the article, so it was a one-page article and 2 columns, and in the middle of it was a picture. And the caption underneath the picture read, "A picture from the beginning of the universe, when the universe was a mustard-sized seed of matter." Like they were quoting Nachmanides, unbeknownst to them. And my head just started buzzing. Right? It was bzzz, like it was crazy. Right? They actually took exactly what Nachmanides says. Right? The tohu vavohu, the world was created in mustard-sized seed matter, that the entire world was compressed in it, and out of that came the world. What's the purpose of the world? Right? You would just think that the Torah would teach us right? The purpose of the world right at the beginning. And so it does. The oral law says actually verse 2. And the world was tohu, vavohu, vachoshech, apanei sahom. Right? There are 4 words here. Tohu, vavohu, choshech, apanei sahom. Right? Says the Talmud. The word tohu, that stands for the Babylonian exile. That the world was created, there were going to be 4 exiles, and the exile of the Jewish people were going to be sent out, and then our job was to, the Spirit of God hovering over the water, that's Mashiach. So it says, in the world was tohu, that's the Babylonian exile. Vavohu is the Greek, not Greek, is the Persian exile. Choshech, darkness, is the Greek exile. Apanei sahom, in the face of the depths, that's the Roman exile.
Which we're still in.
Which we're still in today. We're still in the 4th and final exile. And actually, it's interesting because it's on the face of the depths, right? It's in present, right? And so that it's the longest by far of any of these exiles. And it actually talks about there how Yishmael, right, or the Muslims, how they are actually going to sort of take over at the end of the Roman exile. So it's, and then what? But Ruach Elokim, the Spirit of God, that's Mashiach, right? That's the Messianic era, right? So the world was created for these 4 exiles, which is God's hiddenness, and then our job is to come back and to bring godliness into this world, and then that becomes, right? That becomes our job, right? That becomes our job. To go and to bring this godliness into the world. Okay. Now, one of the things we pointed out was that the Torah is not giving us the order of how things were created, right? Because it tells us, first we have to understand, to start with this way. Verses 1 and 2. In the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty and darkness on the face of the depths, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the water. Verses 1 and verses 2 are really prepositions. They're warm-ups. And God said, let there be light. Right? So verse 1 and verse 2 is not saying what was created. It's sort of setting the stages. Verse 3 is, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. The way I always imagine it, you ever go watch a play, right? And sort of the curtains draw back, and then click, the light turns on, and you see a scene in front of you. That's how I envision this. But the Torah is not telling me the order of how things were created, right? It's not a laundry list of all the things that were created. There's water here. There's seemingly an earth, but none of that's being told when it's being created. God said, let there be light. That's where it's picking up. Okay? So those are prepositions, right? So verse 1 and verse 2 are really just prepositions, right? Are prepositions to what the world is. Okay?
But just so there's no confusion, but after that, those prepositions, it does discuss the sequence of the creation.
There's a general sequence.
I mean, you wouldn't think man was created before the earth.
Correct. Right.
Each day has...
there's a sequence to it. Yes, then there's an order to it. There's a reason was put into these different days, right? And we'll get to actually what was created on every day. And there were actually 3 things created every day. And actually, day 6 there were 6 things created, because the 3 things for Shabbat were created on Friday. Okay, but we'll get to that. right? And also, the Torah does not tell us how they were created. Right? The scientists are spending their time figuring out how things were created. But the Torah is just telling what was created. Right? But all the details of how God went about creating everything, right? You couldn't carry that book around with you. It would be too heavy, right? That the Torah is so condensed is crazy. Chapter 1 has, right, to clarify a point, the Torah tells you the why, not necessarily the how, and science is really focused on the how, but not the why. And so it's really the two complementary ideas that should really work hand in hand. So where did the light come from on day 1? And if we said the sun doesn't come till day 4, so where did that light come from?
We said it was God.
What did we say?
It was God creating the light.
Correct. So
he didn't need the sun
to have light.
Right.
Right. So it could be the light from the Big Bang, right? That was there, right? But we'll call that instantaneous light. And what happened was, instantaneous light is great. The light we have today is from the sun is really, I think, 8 minutes old. Any sun when we think the sun sees sunlight, it's really left the sun 8 minutes ago, or delayed light. So it's actually, there's a nice little idea to think about, that if you look at light of the sun as being truth, standing for truth. So God originally created the world with instantaneous truth, or what we'll call with judgment. But ultimately, we have to realize that the world couldn't exist being just on truth. And so God had to go ahead and create the world so that there was delayed truth. It means that the bad guy sometimes seems to be winning, but at the end he'll always lose. And that's what we call delayed light. Right? And so that's always interesting how God first created the world with light, but then he switched it to delayed light. So that's really where light comes from. Now, Judaism, when does the day start in Judaism?
At nighttime.
At nighttime. How do we know? Why does it start at nighttime? Because remember, it ends off, what's the last verse over here in day 1? Right? How does it read? It reads like this.
God called the light day, and to the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning on day 1.
There was evening and morning. So you see, evening, that the day starts at evening. So it's evening and morning. As well, it's interesting that it's the Hebrew says Yom Echad, one day. What should it really have said? Yom Rishon. Right? Yom Rishon is the first day, but it doesn't say the first day. It says Yom Rishon on day 1. So why does it say Yom Echad instead of Yom Rishon? So the word echad is one, and the reason for that is because God was alone in his world. God was alone in his world. Angels weren't created until day 2. And since angels weren't created until day 2, so then at that point in time, so therefore it's called Yom Echad, is one, because God was still one in his world. He was the only thing in his world till the angels roll around on day 2. And we mentioned before that there were 3 things that were created on each day. So what were the 3 things that were created on day 1?
Light, darkness.
So it's interesting, right? Good. So heaven, earth, and light. Okay, heaven, earth, and light were created on day 1. Right? Now it's interesting that you brought out darkness as well, right? That the that the world is darkness a creation, or is darkness an absence of light?
It's interesting because the way I read it is that the heavens and the earth weren't created until the second day.
Well, it starts off, right? The beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was void and desolate, right? With darkness upon the surface of the deep and the divine presence of it, right? So God, we know it's there, right? So what was created day one? Heavens, earth, and light. It's interesting because day two was the firmament, Gehenna, and angels. Right? Day three was trees, plant life, and Garden of Eden. Day four was the sun, moon, and constellations. Day five was birds, fish, and Leviathan. Day six was man, woman, creeping creatures, domestic animals, wild beasts, and harmful spirits. That's actually where they had the order of the things that were created in each of these days. Okay, so there's one more point that I want to bring out over here, which I think is important for us to understand, and I think that we'll close with that. How many different names does God have?
72.
And so God has many, many hundreds and hundreds of names, maybe thousands. In fact, I'll tell you something super cool. The Zohar says that the entire Torah was written using only God's names. Okay, so all the arrangements of the letters, right, in the Torah was written using only God's name. Which is fascinating. We understand that God has hundreds of names. So it could be the first letter of one word, the first letter of the next word, the first letter of the third word. First letter of one word, skip 20 letters, and the second letter, and skip 20 letters, get it again. Right? So there's many different ways on how to do it. Right? Or the first letter, the first word, the second letter, the second verse, the third letter, the third verse. Or the last letter, verse 1, right? Last letter, verse 2, last letter, verse 3. There's all these ways. And therefore you could figure out every single letter. I actually once wanted to put it into a spreadsheet, and try to yellow them out as we found God's names. Just like how many times the letters are used to create God's name. So why do we pick to use one name of God vis-a-vis another name of God?
Each name represents a different attribute.
Very good. Right? So it's different attributes of God. Why did God create the world? What attribute was used in the creating of the world?
Truth.
Kindness. Yeah, truth was not a fan to create the world. Right? Because truth says the world's going to be full of falsehood. So MS, right? Truth is what it's all about.
Kindness.
Okay, give me kindness. Kindness is what it's all about. What's fascinating is what name for God is used over here. In the beginning of God's creating the heaven and the earth, or Elohim. And Elohim is God's name of justice. So if the whole world was created because of kindness, or using kindness,
why aren't we using that?
Why are we using that name of God, of Adonai, right? A Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. Why are we using Elohim, God of justice, when it's kindness?
Great question.
So the answer is like this. God, if He's kind, He just keep on giving us. So they said, so let God just keep on giving us everything. The answer is, if God just gave and gave and gave and gave, what would happen is we would begin to feel bad because we'd be takers and not givers. And God is a giver. And so therefore God has to give to us.
And we want to emulate God, so we want to be givers.
So we want to be givers. Right? So we want to be givers. And so what happens is that the greatest way that God can give us is really that, quote unquote, we earn what he gives us. How do we earn what he gives us? So we do the commandments, which is kind of ridiculous. Does God care that I ate kosher today? Right? What does that do for God? What's the answer? Right? Okay, God said, oh, you listened to me, so now I can give you life. Now I can give you sustenance. Now I can have your body work. So justice is the way to which we can get the ultimate kindness. But justice is there just to serve kindness. Okay, so kindness is the thing that it all falls out of, and then justice serves kindness, because otherwise it won't be a complete kindness, because we'd be takers, not givers. So therefore we have to learn, A, we want to be givers, not takers. 2, we want, right, justice is there to serve kindness.
So doesn't that kind of fly in the Western civilization definition of our court system, which seems to be predicated on justice with no real element of kindness?
So it's actually interesting. I think our court system has too much kindness. Right? I think that justice would be, okay, you do X, there's so many more stricter things that it could be. That our court system actually is quite fascinating, where it comes as far as Judaism. Judaism has the most righteous court system. It's interesting, and I feel the American court system tries to mimic it in some way. I don't know that they certainly don't do as good a job, right? But they try to be kind, right? It's a mixture of kindness. I think that there is, and so really the world was created of kindness. And what happens is we have to go ahead and justice is there to serve kindness. So that's why you'll notice in the whole first chapter of Genesis, it's always, the name it uses for God is God of justice. When does it switch to kindness? Once God creates man. Because man won't be able to exist with just justice. So that's when it comes to the creation of man, then it uses God of kindness and God of justice. Which one comes first? Kindness. That's why it's Adonai Elohim, God of mercy, God of justice. And that's really what we do when we say in the Shema. We say Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And you stop and think about it, it's kind of pretty weird. What do you mean? Hear O Israel, God is one. Right? Would it make more sense to write Shema Yisrael Adonai Echad, Hear O Israel, God is one? Why does it say Hear O Israel, God is one? And the answer is like this. Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, Adonai, God of mercy, Eloheinu, God of justice. Seemingly a contradiction. And that, by the way, is where idolatry came from, a contradiction between God of mercy and God of justice. Adonai Echad is really the same God, is one God. Which one? Adonai. It's God of mercy. So when we say Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, Adonai, God of mercy, Eloheinu, God of justice, that might seem to be two different gods, is really Adonai Echad is one and the same God, all merciful. And whenever there's justice, justice is there to serve mercy.
Great.
One more thing before we close. Eloheinu, right? God, or our God, Elohim, which is God, is actually any Hebrew word that ends off with a yud and a mem is plural. So if our God is only one, right, not two, so why does it say Elohim? Why is that the name of God when that would be plural, not singular?
To represent this kindness, mercy combination?
No. So the reason is the word El means powers. So what powers exist in the world? So the powers that exist in the world could be the sun, in Texas, the sun, real sun, right? The moon, right? The moon, right, causes the waves, right? Causes the tides. It controls women, right? The wind, mountains, right? There are a lot of powers that exist in the world. People look at those powers and they ascribe godly qualities to those powers. There's the sun god, there's the moon god, and actually the names in the days of the week are taken after gods. Sunday is the sun god, Monday is the moon god, Thursday is Thor, right? They gave different names, right? That they're named after gods. And so what happens is you go ahead and we say El is power, God's power. When we say God is Elohim, what we're saying is, God, you are the source of all those powers. All those powers might exist independently of you, but it'll look like they're independent of you. But they all come from your power. Right? And that's the way that you interact with the world. Right? So the sun is providing nutrition and light and warmth to the world. That's God being reflected through the sun. And just so a beautiful idea, right? The Talmud says that as the sun moves in the world, it's always singing praise to God. And that's actually why Joshua, when in the book of Joshua, he stops the sun. He stops it from saying praise, and now it's time for the Jewish people to say praise to God, to thank God. So stop it from saying praise. Why is the sun always saying praise? Is so that when people look at the sun and say, oh, look at that, he's a God, they should realize that he's really praising God. So he's always praising God. And that's why Elohim, right? It's plural, because it's saying is God, you are the source of all those powers. And that's, I think, our wrap on day one. There's a lot more to talk about, but I think it's time for us to move on to day two. What do you think, Tom?
Sounds great. Audience is going to be very excited to look forward to day two.
Alrighty. Have a wonderful evening. Tom, don't forget, it's all God, all the time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Breakneck Through the Bible, as presented by Torch Dallas. Please like and subscribe to this podcast. For additional Torch podcasts and past episodes, please visit us at www.torchweb.org and click on podcasts. You can also visit us at www.torchdallas.net. This show was hosted by Rabbi Bentzi Epstein, co-host by Tom Levine. Additional voiceover by Stephen Fellows. Sound recording and editing, Eitan Ayan. Co-producers, Eitan Ayan, Benjamin Epstein, and Stephen Fellows. Executive producer, Stephen Fellows. Marketing by Jared Leshin of Hypersway. Special thanks goes to Rabbi Arya Wolbe of Torch Houston. Tell your friends and help us grow. Please visit where you get your podcast and give us a rating. It's the best way to help people find us. This has been a production of Torch Dallas. Thank you, and we look forward to you joining us again for another episode of Breakneck Through the Bible.